Section 7 of Oscar Wilde, Art and Morality, a defence of the picture of Dorian Gray, edited by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Section 7. The sphere of art and the sphere of ethics are absolutely distinct and separate. Mr. Oscar Wilde's defence. To the editor of the St. James's Gazette. Footnote, June the 30th. Sir, in your issue of this evening you publish a letter from a London editor, which clearly insinuates in the last paragraph that I have in some way sanctioned the circulation of an expression of opinion on the part of the proprietors of Lippincott's Magazine of the literary and artistic value of my story of the picture of Dorian Gray. Allow me, Sir, to state that there are no grounds for this insinuation. I was not aware that any such document was being circulated, and I have written to the agents, Messrs. Ward and Locke, who cannot, I feel sure, be primarily responsible for its appearance, to ask them to withdraw it at once. No publisher should ever express an opinion of the value of what he publishes. That is a matter entirely for the literary critic to decide. I must admit, as one to whom contemporary literature is constantly submitted for criticism, that the only thing that ever prejudices me against a book is the lack of literary style. But I can quite understand how any ordinary critic would be strongly prejudiced against a work that was accompanied by a premature and unnecessary panegyric from the publisher. A publisher is simply a useful middleman. It is not for him to anticipate the verdict of criticism. I may, however, while expressing my thanks to the London editor for drawing attention to this, I trust, purely American method of procedure, venture to differ from him in one of his criticisms. He states that he regards the expression complete, as applied to a story, as a specimen of the adjectival exuberance of the puffer. Here it seems to me he sadly exaggerates. What my story is an interesting problem. What my story is not is a novelette, a term which you have more than once applied to it. There is no such word in the English language as novelette. It should not be used. It is merely part of the slang of Fleet Street. In another part of your paper, Sir, you state that I received your assurance of the lack of malice in your critic somewhat grudgingly. This is not so. I frankly said that I accepted that assurance quite readily, and that your own denial and that of your critic were sufficient. Nothing more generous could have been said. What I did feel was that you saved your critic from the charge of malice by convicting him of the unpardonable crime of lack of literary instinct. I still feel that. To call my book an ineffective attempt at allegory that in the hands of Mr. Anstey might have been made striking is absurd. Mr. Anstey's sphere in literature and my sphere are different. You then gravely ask me what rights I imagine literature possesses. That is really an extraordinary question for the editor of a newspaper such as yours to ask. The rights of literature, Sir, are the rights of intellect. I remember once hearing M. Renan say that he would sooner live under a military despotism than under the despotism of the Church, because the former merely limited the freedom of action, while the latter limited the freedom of mind. You say that a work of art is a form of action. It is not. It is the highest mode of thought. In conclusion, Sir, let me ask you not to force on me this continued correspondence by daily attacks. It is a trouble and a nuisance. As you assailed me first, I have a right to the last word. Let that last word be the present letter, and leave my book, I beg you, to the immortality that it deserves. I am, Sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde, 16 Tite Street, S.W., June 28th. The last word. We should be sorry to deny the ex-editor of the Woman's World the feminine privilege of the last word, for which he pleads today. At the same time, we cannot admit that we force upon Mr. Oscar Wilde the burden of a newspaper controversy by daily attacks. Mr. Wilde published a book, and presumably submitted it to criticism. We exercised our rights as critics of contemporary literature by pointing out that we thought the book feeble and offensive. Mr. Wilde replies, defending his book against our unfavourable criticism, and we have again the right to point out that we do not consider that he has satisfactorily met our arguments and our objections. For the rest, we are quite willing to leave the picture of Dorian Gray to the immortality it deserves. We must add one word. We congratulate Mr. Wilde on his emphatic disavowal of the ridiculous puff preliminary which his publishers had chosen to circulate. 2 days later, July 2nd, the editor could not resist one more word. Modest Mr. Oscar Wilde, he has been having a little dispute with the Daily Chronicle as well as with the St. James's Gazette, and this is what he writes to our contemporary. My story is an essay on decorative art. It reacts against the crude brutality of plain realism. It is poisonous, if you like, but you cannot deny that it is also perfect, and perfection is what we artists aim at. End of section 7.